Rain lashed against the sash windows of the Ashworth's Georgian terrace in Clapham, its rhythmic percussion a dreary counterpoint to the fevered pulse in Amelia's chest. She sat hunched on her bed, illuminated only by the pallid glow of her laptop screen, the shadows playing across her sharp cheekbones like chiaroscuro in an old master's portrait. At 20, Amelia Ashworth was not unremarkable. She possessed the quiet elegance common to young women raised in academically rigorous, emotionally reserved British households. Her ash-blonde hair was pulled back in a severe yet becoming low ponytail, and she wore, as was her habit, a tailored black shirt buttoned to the throat, tucked into a knee-length black pleated skirt that whispered with every shift of her posture. To an observer, she might have seemed the very picture of composure. But inwardly, she was adrift in a maelstrom of dread. For months, Amelia had been ensnared in a web of her own making. A foolish flirtation with online sports betting, initially dismissed as a harmless diversion, had metastasized into a ruinous compulsion. She'd lost not only her modest savings but had accrued £4,800 in debt through predatory loan apps that charged interest rates bordering on the usurious. Her part-time job at a Bloomsbury cafe barely covered her tube fare, let alone rent or textbooks. And yet, she could not bring herself to confess to her mother, Claire Ashworth, a woman whose very identity was woven from threads of propriety, historical stewardship, and unimpeachable discretion. Then, 3 days prior, while clearing cobwebbed trunks from the attic during a rare bout of filial diligence, Amelia had stumbled upon a battered leather dispatch box engraved with her great-grandfather's initials. AEA inside, beneath moth-eaten silk scarves and a rusted pocket watch, lay a slim USB drive sealed in a wax envelope, stamped with a single word in her mother's precise hand, confidential. Curiosity, that most ancient of human frailties, proved irresistible. The files within were a trove of Cold War-era intrigue, telegrams redacted with thick black ink, ciphered communiques, and most damningly a signed affidavit from 1961 in which Arthur Edwin Ashworth, then a junior attaché at the British Embassy in West Berlin, admitted to orchestrating a clandestine exfiltration of 3 East German dissident families through Checkpoint Charlie. Berlin, as history attests, was a western island in a communist sea, an ideal place for American spies to gather intelligence on the Soviet military. But British operatives operated with even greater subtlety, their actions buried beneath layers of diplomatic immunity and plausible deniability. Arthur's deeds, though morally righteous, had skirted the edges of treason. The Foreign Office had buried the matter to avoid inflaming tensions during the Berlin crisis, the very year the wall rose like a scar across the heart of Europe. For decades, the secret had remained entombed. Claire, inheriting it upon her father's death, had treated it not as gossip, but as sacred trust, a silent covenant between generations. Amelia, however, saw only opportunity. That night, she contacted the Cipher Post, an online rag infamous for its voracious appetite for classified leaks. After verifying the authenticity of the files, they employed a former GCHQ analyst. They offered her £5,000 for exclusive digital rights. Desperate and ashamed, Amelia accepted. She told herself it was history, not betrayal. She told herself no one would truly suffer. She was catastrophically wrong. By midday, the story detonated across the digital. Ashworth legacy tarnished, historian's family hid Cold War espionage tie. Claire's university issued a statement of deep concern. Her colleagues began distancing themselves. Even the local grocer avoided her gaze. And Amelia? She sat in her room, frozen, watching her mother's life unravel, all for a sum that wouldn't even clear her debt. The front door opened at 7:03 p.m., its familiar creak now sounding like the hinge of a tomb. Claire entered, her camel trench coat spattered with rain, her face ashen beneath the soft light of the hallway sconce. She carried not her usual leather satchel, but a thick manila envelope stamped confidential, King's College London. Amelia, still clad in her black shirt and skirt, sat rigid on the sofa, her phone screen dark but her guilt luminous. Claire didn't remove her coat. She didn't speak. She simply stood before the fireplace, her eyes fixed on the framed photograph above the mantel. Arthur Ashworth in his Royal Navy uniform, stern yet kind-eyed, flanked by his wife and infant son. "Have you seen the news?" Claire finally asked, her voice low, devoid of its usual scholarly warmth. Emilia nodded mutely. "Do you comprehend the magnitude of what you've done?" I thought it was just old papers," Emilia stammered, her voice fraying at the edges. "I didn't think it would." "Did you sell it?" Claire cut in, turning sharply. Her gaze was glacial, dissecting. "The files. The affidavit. The exfiltration logs." Emilia's breath hitched. She looked down at her hands, folded tightly in her lap, the knuckles white. "I traced the blockchain transaction," Claire continued, her tone chillingly calm. "Through Dr. Lin at Cybersec. The wallet was registered under your student IP. The timestamp aligns with your login from the attic Wi-Fi." She stepped closer, her heels clicking on the hardwood like a judge's gavel. "Emilia. Look at me." Tears blurred Emilia's vision as she raised her head. "I was drowning, Mum. I didn't know where else to turn." "Drowning?" Claire's voice cracked. "Is that what you call greed disguised as desperation? You didn't ask me for help. You didn't seek counsel. You chose to auction off our family's soul for pocket change." She inhaled sharply, as if steadying herself against a wave of grief. "In this house, betrayal is not merely a mistake. It is a rupture. And ruptures," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "require mending through consequence." She walked to the armchair and sat with regal composure. "Come here." Emilia rose on unsteady legs, her black skirt swaying like a mourner's veil. She stood before her mother, small and exposed. "You are 20, Claire said, "but maturity is not measured in years. It is measured in choices. And tonight, you will be reminded of the gravity of yours. You will be punished as you were when you were a child. Not in anger. In sorrow. And in hope." The study was a sanctuary of quiet intellect, mahogany shelves groaning under the weight of volumes on Tudor diplomacy, Napoleonic treaties, and post-war reconstruction. A fire crackled low in the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows. Claire settled into her grandfather's wingback chair, its leather supple from decades of use. "Lie across my lap," she instructed. Emilia obeyed, her body folding over her mother's knees with practiced submission, though it had been a decade since such discipline had been meted out. Her black skirt rode up just enough to reveal the demure black tights beneath, her shirt creased at the waist. She buried her face in the crook of her elbow, inhaling the faint scent of beeswax and bergamot that always clung to her mother's clothes. The first spank landed with a crisp, resonant thwack, firm, precise, and utterly devoid of malice. Emilia jerked slightly but did not cry out. "Do you understand why you are being punished?" Claire asked, her hand resting momentarily on Emilia's back. "Yes," came the muffled reply. "Say it." "Because I sold our family's secret, for money. Thwack. And I dishonored Grandad's memory, and your trust. Thwack. Thwack. Thwack." Each stroke was deliberate, rhythmic, calibrated not to wound but to imprint a physical echo of moral reckoning. The sting bloomed across Emilia's backside, sharp and burning, but far worse was the shame, the crushing weight of having disappointed the one person whose approval she valued above all. Tears seeped through her lashes, dampening her sleeves. She bit her lip to stifle sobs, but they escaped anyway, soft, broken sounds that filled the quiet room like a requiem. After a dozen measured swats, Claire ceased. Her hand remained warm and steady on Emilia's lower back. "This was never about inflicting pain," she said softly. It was about restoring gravity. Secrets like ours are not currency. They are legacies. And legacies demand reverence. Still draped over her mother's lap, Emilia turned her tear-streaked face upward, her ponytail undone, strands clinging to her damp cheeks. "Mum, I'm so desperately sorry," she whispered, her voice raw. "I was cowardly and selfish. I thought the past was dead weight, but it's not. It's our foundation. And I tried to pawn it off like rubbish." She reached blindly for her mother's hand. "I'll do anything to fix this. Anything." Claire gently helped her sit upright, then cupped Emilia's face in her palms. "Apologies are only words until they are backed by action. But this, your remorse, this is real. And that gives us a place to begin." Emilia nodded fiercely. "I'll contact the cipher post tonight. I'll offer full retraction. I'll return every pound." "Good," Claire said, her eyes glistening. "That is your penance." That night, long after the house had fallen silent, Emilia sat at her desk, the rain now a gentle hush against the glass. She drafted a formal legal request to the tabloid, citing breach of familial privacy and historical ethics under the Data Protection Act. She included scanned copies of Arthur's will, which explicitly entrusted Claire with stewardship of the archive. Then, she opened her banking app. With trembling fingers, she initiated a transfer, £5,000 to a newly established account, the Ashworth Heritage Restoration Fund. In the memo, she typed, "To rebuild what I shattered." She printed a letter on thick cotton paper, her handwriting neat despite her tears, and slipped it beneath her mother's door before retiring. Morning arrived cloaked in pale gold light. In the kitchen, the scent of freshly brewed Earl Grey and toasted sourdough filled the air. Claire sat at the table, Emilia's letter open before her, her expression unreadable. Emilia entered quietly, wearing her black skirt again, but this time paired with a crisp white blouse, her hair neatly rebraided. She looked younger, yet somehow more grounded. Her mother looked up. "You returned the money?" "Yes. And I've scheduled a meeting with a financial counselor at the university. They offer free sessions for students in difficult circumstances." Claire nodded slowly. Then, to Emilia's surprise, she reached across the table and took her hand. "I should have asked how you were. I assumed your silence meant strength. But silence can be suffering in disguise." Over breakfast, they spoke openly about debt, shame, the unbearable pressure to appear sorted in modern Britain. Emilia confessed her gambling. Claire admitted her own academic anxieties. Walls, long unspoken, began to crumble. That afternoon, Claire retrieved another box from the attic, this one filled not with secrets, but with ordinary yet precious relics, letters from Arthur to his wife during the Blitz, grocery lists from 1948, photographs of Emilia as a child at Stonehenge. "These," Claire said, "are ours to share. The Imperial War Museum has requested them for an exhibit on everyday courage. May I help digitize them?" Emilia asked, her voice tentative yet hopeful. Claire smiled a true smile, rare and warm. "You may." And so, in the hushed sanctuary of the study, Emilia began her atonement. Wearing her black skirt like a vow, she scanned each yellowed page with reverent care, her fingers brushing over ink faded by time but not by meaning. The punishment had left its mark. But the work of redemption? That would be her legacy.